Got a new gavel. We will call the meeting of the Edina Planning Commission for May 9th, 2012 to order. Jackie, would you please call the roll?
Here.
Here.
Commissioner Schroeder.
Here.
Commissioner Roth.
Here.
Commissioner Platter.
Here.
Commissioner Chakowski.
Here.
Commissioner Carpenter.
Here.
Commissioner Fisher.
Here.
Chair Bradel.
Here. Thank you. First item of business on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. As you can see, we've got one public hearing tonight, and then some discussion on zoning ordinance suggestions. I would make a point on the zoning ordinance update discussion. Some of the members of the commission had suggested that perhaps that discussion might take place off camera, as we have done in the past, which might encourage better or more discussion among the commission members. Planner Teague and I discussed this earlier this week. It was my judgment that because it was on the agenda and already posted on the agenda that we shouldn't try and take it off camera, so we'll have that discussion on camera tonight. In the future, if we have zoning ordinance updates, we could schedule that for a work session, invite the public so there is notice of that, but we wouldn't necessarily have to have a lengthy discussion on camera for that. So I hope everybody's okay with that decision. I didn't consult with anybody. I just decided it. As George Bush once said, I'm the decider. So.
Mr. Chair, I'm just curious, what about talking about zoning ordinances would be better off camera? I mean, and the only reason I'm going back to when we had special work sessions for that, I don't think the idea was just to be off camera. It was just that we needed more time to work. But the fact that we have 2 meetings right now, I mean, would we need to have special sessions to do that?
Perhaps not. I'm not sure. Planner Teague was conveying some discussion that some of the other commission members had and had expressed a concern, or maybe not necessarily a concern, but the issue. So I thought I would bring it up to address whoever it was that addressed those issues. Other comments, changes, or corrections to be made to the agenda tonight? Hearing none, I'll take a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Good, thank you. The first item is approval of the consent agenda. The first item on that is the minutes of the meeting of the Planning Commission, April 25th. I understand that those minutes were not included in the packet. They were mailed to our homes today, but if you didn't receive the mail, you didn't receive the minutes. So the suggestion is that we hold that off until the next meeting. Does anybody have any objections to that? Okay. Then the first item on the consent agenda, or going forward, is, I guess that's it, is community comment. During community comment, members of the public are welcome to come to the podium and address any issues that they believe are of importance to the city and to the Planning Commission. We ask that you not comment or use this time to comment on matters which are on the agenda or will be discussed at a public hearing shortly. But any other concerns or questions or comments that anyone might like to make, we're welcome. We would welcome your comments. So I ask the public if there is anybody who wishes to address the commission on any topic. Seeing none, we'll move on the agenda. The first item is for a public hearing is front yard setback variance for Christy Wenner, 5025 Nob Hill in Edina. Chris?
Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission, the request is a 32.45-foot front yard setback variance to build a new home on a vacant lot located at 5025 Knob Hill. The subject property is a vacant lot. As you can see, it is between the home to the north here and a home to the south. It's a vacant lot, and the aerial photograph shows topography. It's a very steep slopes from front to rear on the property. The property owner is hoping to sell the lot for the construction of a new home. The ordinance requires that any new home maintain the average front yard setbacks of the homes on either side. What you can see is that the home to the north is a neck lot with the home quite a ways back from the front lot line or from the street. The home to the south is much closer. This illustrates the setbacks that are along Knob Hill. It comes off of the frontage road of Highway 100. There's a cul-de-sac here, and then it goes northward and terminates in a cul-de-sac at the end. Variety of homes along the block, variety of lot sizes. What you will notice is the home to the south is 24.8 feet away from the front lot line. Home to the north is a little over 110 feet, which then translates into an average front yard setback of a little over 67 feet. This would be the required setback for the lot, showing an outline of the house that is being proposed on the property. What you'll notice is for a conforming setback, it's pushed way down the hill. It's also very much in view of the windows that are facing that lot from the property to the south, and also the property to the north. The further back you push the house, the more visible it is from the properties both north and south. This is the proposed setback that actually was going to go in front of the Planning Commission on April 25th. It was pulled from the agenda because the property owners wanted to work with the neighbors. The neighbors felt that what had been proposed previously, which was a 25-foot setback at the front corner of the house, up the hill from the required setback, was too close. The neighbors agreed to work with the homeowners, and the homeowners agreed to work with the neighbors, and they have come up with a 35-foot front yard setback, which adds 10 feet onto what they had originally proposed for the home. This is the home. It's the same house plan that was proposed for the April 25th meeting. It is sort of a placeholder. They won't know exactly how the home will look until they're done, but they wanted to give a representation of the massing. It will be a two-story home. It will have a three-car garage, side elevations, and rear elevation of the home. But they did make it clear that it may not necessarily look like they're representing it. It's the massing and the location that they're showing in the plan. Staff does recommend approval of the variance. Staff was supportive of the previous variance in April 25th, 2012. The conditions in the planning report remain the same. Staff continues to support the front yard setback variance request. Approval is based on the following findings. With the exception of the variance requested, the proposal will meet all of the requirements for height, coverage, and setback. The proposal will meet the required standards for a variance because the proposed use of the property is reasonable as it is consistent with the surrounding properties. There are 4 other homes in the block that have a 30-foot setback. One to the south that has a 24.8-foot front yard setback, and one across the street that has a 35-foot setback, which would be matching the setback that they're proposing for this house. There was a variance granted to allow a 20-foot front yard setback for the property. It was granted by the city in 1990 for a new home to be built on the lot. However, it was never built, so the variance lapsed. Conditions on the property remain the same as they did in 1990. The topography was a challenge in locating the plan for that house as well. The practical difficulty is the steep topography of the lot combined with the required front yard setback You have one house that's very close, the other one is very far back. It makes it very difficult to locate the house, given the topography on the lot. The home to the north is much further back than most of the homes on the block as well. The imposed setback limits design opportunity. The intent of the ordinance is to provide adequate spacing from the street. The proposed home will be further back from the street than the home to the south and also 4 others on the block. Approval of the variance should be subject to that the staff review the site plan and the plans, and that they be similar and match those survey dates stamped April 30th, 2012, and the building plans and elevations date stamped March 30th, 2012. And with that, I will answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Chris. Questions for staff? Commissioner Platter?
What's the approximate drop across the lot?
How much does
slope.
it drop?
Yeah.
It drops anywhere from 40 to 45 feet, and then it levels off. There's a pond in back, but
Okay.
I do have a photograph, but it might not give you a real good picture. This is standing on the flat part, and then it just drops, and
It's steep.
it's very steep. It just is level by it's level by the street. Actually, a lot of that level area is right of way, and then you can kind of see the edge of where it just cliffs off and drops down.
Commissioner Schroeder?
Mr. Chair, I have a question. Chris, you said in your presentation that the plans that are submitted are kind of placeholders. We have a condition suggesting that the building plans and elevations date stamped are one of the conditions of approval. Is that actually supposed to be in there?
Well,
If it's a placeholder, it seems like we're tying them to these plans, but you said it's a placeholder.
the plans are placeholders. The condition is that it is subject to staff approval. The site should be developed and maintained in substantial conformance with the following plans. And what I meant by that was that the massing, the height, the footprint, yes, would remain basically the same. But the look of it, they don't know exactly what it's going to look
Okay,
like.
thank you.
Other questions of staff? Thank you, Chris. Does the proponent wish to make any comments?
Good evening. Thanks for the opportunity to speak tonight and hearing our request. Just a real quick introduction. I'm Zach Wenner. My wife, Kirsty Wenner, and myself have lived in Edina for the past 7 years on the east side, and added 2 little girls in the course of 20 months and we need more space. So started looking about 1.5 years ago, and as everybody knows, there are a lot of challenges with the real estate market right now, especially in Edina. Things move quick and inventory is low. So we sold our house, luckily without too much of an issue, but continued to search and maintained that we wanted to stay in Edina, love the community, love the schools. And when this lot came available, we were very excited. We had an offer in within 18 hours of finding it. And the challenge on the lot is that it's very steep. If we can get this variance, we are very excited to be part of the neighborhood and build our dream home there. Any questions?
Questions for the proponent? Thank you, Mr. Winter.
Hi, I'm Scott Lair with Greenwood Design Build. We're working with the clients, the winners, to build the home for them. Don't have a whole lot to add to what Chris added. Just wanted to see if you guys had any questions for me, really. We have built quite a few here in Edina. We're located in Edina. We've been working through this with all the neighbors, trying to make sure everybody's happy with it. So that's kind of why I got delayed to today, was to make sure that there were no there were issues the first one, so now it seems like we've worked out all the differences, so everybody will be okay with it. So I guess.
Good. Commissioner Fisher?
Yeah, I guess the question I would have, as you go through your process with the client, I look at this site, and it's obviously got some issues. It's not a typical site.
It does, yeah.
When you look at, in the process of creating that footprint for the house? Are you starting with sort of a standard plan? Because that's the one question I really have here is, how much do you try to customize the building to fit the site?
It is. We customize, all of our houses are custom. We really don't have what I would call a standard plan. We've kind of designed it for them. We didn't start on the plans until after we found the lot. So the plan is designed for the lot. The plan, it's just a tough lot to build on, no matter really
Sure,
whatever plan you
yeah.
put on it. It's just the slope of the lot. So the backyard will have some drop to it, which
Okay.
is kind of what happened next door too. The big reason for it is the house to the north of it it's really narrow at the front of it and goes back. So if you could set it at the average setback in the normal, if it were two normal houses, there'd be no issues. You wouldn't need a variance, but that one pushes you so far down the hill that it just makes it really difficult.
Okay, thank you.
You'd have to come in from the other street.
Exactly, yeah. Thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Lair? All right, thank you. Anyone else from the public wish to speak to this issue? Seeing no one come forth, I'll take a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Public hearing is closed. Commission comments, discussion. Commissioner Carpenter?
I just say that I think it's commendable that they have worked hard with the neighborhood. It's something we always ask for and don't always get, so I welcome that. In general, with respect to the request for the variance, I think it's reasonable under the circumstances, and I would support it.
Okay. Other comments from the commission? Commissioner Schroeder?
Mr. Chair, I think I likewise am supportive of the variance, but I think it would benefit us to change the second condition outlined in the staff report. Instead of kind of suggesting that it will generally conform, I think we should be more specific, saying that it's going to conform to the footprint, the height, the mass, which I would define as kind of the perceived visual effect as viewed from the street, as well as the general configuration. If these are the plans that have been shared with the neighbors, this is generally what they've been agreeing to. And if we were to come back, and I think just about every variance we've granted, we've had an actual proposal for a site that we've been able to respond to. And so the more definitive we can be that the building's going to be this footprint set on the ground, this height, this mass, and this general configuration, I think it will help the neighbors maintain some continuity with the discussions they've had with the proponent.
Yes? I assume you're going to address that particular question?
Actually, I wanted to make a comment. My name is Tom Valdivia. I'm actually the neighbor in the lot to the north.
Okay.
So I guess I'm the one that's causing this problem because of the extreme setback that we have. But given your comment, Commissioner, I wanted to let you know that there was a revised plan that we've had a chance, the neighbors have had a chance to look at, and we think is much more favorable. So rather than sort of latching onto that specific one, there's one that we've seen that we prefer, and I wanted to make sure that this was put into a consideration. So I don't know if there's a way that you can see this or not, or if it's included in the revised packet. But I wanted to make sure that what we've seen is consistent with the comments that you're making and that we don't get locked into what has been presented already.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, can I offer a comment? I would suggest that what they're proposing here would appear, even though we're only looking at the front elevation, would appear to have the same height, visual mass, and from what we can tell, general configuration. We can't tell any of the footprint here, but it would seem to be consistent with the plans that we have in front of us, in general terms.
Mr. Lair, could you comment on this, please?
Yeah, absolutely. It is, basically it's just a new front elevation on the same footprint. The size of the house, the heights, nothing changed. It's just part of it is just the hand-drawn version of it always looks a little bit better. The computer-drawn one that you have is hard to tell. I mean, it's just a little more cold.
Okay, let me ask you a question. If we adopted the variance subject to the condition that the building to be built have the general height, mass, footprint, and general configuration of the drawings as submitted, would that cause you or your clients any difficulty in getting this building constructed?
No, we're totally okay with that.
Okay.
That is the one. It may change a little bit from that one, but it's really getting a lot closer. And that is, we shared it with the neighbors, so that kind of was part of all these conversations.
Okay.
So we have no problem with that at all.
Okay. I think, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Other comments by the commission? Yes, since we've reopened the public hearing.
I am Dee Dee Darling, and I am at 5012 Nobile. And the only reason that I'm agreeing to this variance on the setback is because I'm concerned that as they get into the project, that it's going to be a money issue, and the first thing they're going to do is pull back and not have this go back more to the original design and not go more for this design. So what guarantee, why should I have to give up my consent or agreement to the setback when they don't have to follow anything, other than what you're saying is height and footprint?
That's a good question. Commissioner Schroeder?
Mr. Chair, our ordinances don't dictate design. We dictate quantifiable elements of how a building is situated in a site. We don't dictate the type of shingles, the color of paint. It's hard for us to actually control the design beyond several parameters that I kind of outlined as footprint, height, mass, and general configuration. I don't think we have the ability to lock them into a specific design at this point.
Other comments from the commission? Ma'am, yes, go ahead.
One of the reasons why you were going along with this is because you say that the neighbors are in agreement. The neighbors aren't necessarily in agreement.
Well, one of the reasons we're going along with this is because a variance has been presented which appears to meet the requirements for a variance. And one of the things that we like to do is make sure that the developers, when they develop or propose developments, especially when they need a variance, if they didn't need a variance, it would not even come before the commission.
Right.
But we give the opportunity for the public to comment, and we also ask that the developers discuss the issue with the neighbors so that the neighbors, if they have some objections or particular points, have the opportunity to present those objections. This is not a situation where unanimous consent of the neighborhood is required. Neighborhood comments do influence what the commission does, and we've noted your concerns about that. As Commissioner Schroeder has mentioned, we cannot dictate design. We can require that the general height, mass, footprint, and so on be part of the variance, and a building to be constructed outside those parameters would be outside the permissions of the building permit and would cause the owner and the developer difficulties with the city down the line. So that's kind of how the variance process does.
I just wanted to make one note. When she mentioned that there was a variance issued in the 90s,
1990.
it was for a one-story home.
Right. Thank you. Other comments by the commission? Do we have a motion?
Chair? I would be
Mr. Carpenter.
happy to make a motion to approve the variance subject to the conditions that Commissioner Schroeder laid out.
Second.
That would include the items in the staff report plus the additional items mentioned by Commissioner Schroeder. Is that correct?
It would.
Okay. The motion's been made and seconded. Is there further discussion concerning this issue? Commissioner Fisher?
Well, even though we don't get to vote on it, if I were voting, I do like the second scheme much better.
Other comments or other discussion on the motion? Commissioner Scherer? Oh, I'm sorry. All right, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? The variance is approved. I would suggest that there is a 2-week waiting period during which persons may file an appeal to the City Council. Otherwise, go forth and build. The next items on the agenda are some discussion concerning potential zoning ordinance updates, one dealing with drive-through facilities, one dealing with energy generation systems, and one dealing with subdivision issues. So, Carrie, do you want to make any opening remarks on each of those as we consider them serially?
I can. Would you like to take these one at a time? That might be the best way to. With each of these, I don't think we're looking for a motion or a recommendation to move any of these forward. If we come to general consensus, we could put it on a future Planning Commission agenda and move it along that way, kind of keeping in line with the process that we had been following in moving some of these zoning ordinance amendments along. So all three of these items for discussion with the idea of eventually moving them along, potentially the next meeting. So the first one is the drive-through facility ordinance. You may recall Julie Risser from the Energy and Environment Commission, former planning commissioner, had been working with that commission on an amendment regarding drive-through facilities. And it basically repeals the ordinance amendment that was approved by the council back in 2009. That was geared more for the drive-through that was proposed for a restaurant that was to go in at Valley View and Wooddale. That restaurant never moved forward. So the idea here is to repeal that ordinance that allowed a drive-through facility associated with a restaurant in a PCD 1 district. We did consider some other conditions that would be placed on drive-through facilities in other zoning districts. The ordinance before you doesn't incorporate any of those specifically. If we want to continue looking at our drive-through ordinance in some of our other zoning districts, we may want to consider a conditional use permit for any type of a drive-through facility that would provide an opportunity for Planning Commission and Council to put conditions on those types of uses. But with that, I can turn it back to the Planning Commission for any discussion on this item.
Thank you. Is there discussion? Anybody wish to comment on this proposal? Commissioner Platter?
I personally think it'd be a good idea to have this as a conditional use permit across all zoning districts, because each one could come in on its own regard then, or have to come in to get a look at. So that's my opinion on that.
Commissioner Carpenter?
You know, I hadn't really thought about that, but I would actually generally agree that that would be one easy way to manage these types of facilities on a, I don't want to say generic, but on a little bit more flexible basis. And certain conditions may be appropriate in one instance and less appropriate in another. And the Planning Commission would actually have the ability to weigh those and make decisions about that would be customized to each particular location. So separate and apart from what other discussion we might have, the idea of a conditional use permit sounds attractive to me.
I've got a question just on the specific proposal that Ms. Risser had put together, talking about stacking spaces per bay. As I understand it, this particular ordinance would allow it financial institutions, car washes, accessory car washes, and then all other uses. What's the enforcement mechanism if we approve a drive-through for something that has, and we allow 3 stacking spaces in the drive-through, what's the enforcement mechanism for that, or is there an enforcement mechanism for something like that?
Are you referring to something that's out there today?
No, not necessarily today, although I could make an example, but I won't. But for example, the ordinance requires all other uses, 3 stacking spaces per bay. So we get a proposal to come, we adopt this, the city adopts this ordinance, and somebody comes along and they want to build a drive-through for a dry cleaner or something like that, and they're allowed to have 3 stacks. They're allowed to stack 3 cars in the drive-through. So suppose someday it's before prom or something like that, and they've got 16 cars and they're backed into the street and they're blocking traffic. It's not the building department's not going to enforce that. Maybe somebody's got to call the police. I don't know. I'm just wondering how does that work in the city?
Technically, they would, if they have their 3 stacking spaces behind the car that's being served, they would meet the code, even though they had 8, 10, 12 cars. Technically, they still meet our ordinance.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't looked at it that way, but I have a particular mindset about that. Commissioner Schroeder?
I have a basic question. In our ordinance here, let's just take the first one, the financial institution, 3 stacking spaces per bay. Is that the minimum or is that the maximum? We don't actually say. Well, it doesn't say minimum or maximum, so
You're right, it doesn't. I didn't include there may be language before it. I don't know. I don't have it in front of me, but that could be a good cleanup item. What you're looking at is the existing ordinance.
And I'm assuming it's meant to be minimum.
Right.
We've talked about this before relative to parking and having parking maximums. I wonder whether we should talk about it relative to, and I think it would take care of some of the issues we have. We actually define a maximum number of parking of stacking spaces that we would allow. It might, I don't know if it's good or bad, but that's why we're having this as a discussion. Mm-hmm. I think it would be a good discussion point, and it might get to some of the issues that people have concerns about. We don't want stacking for 25 or 30 cars, so why wouldn't we define uses that don't take that many spaces? Mm-hmm. I don't even know if that's practical, but it dawned on me as I was reading this, we don't define minimum or maximum. Maybe we could.
Commissioner Fisher?
As long as we're talking about number of stacking spaces, is that a typo for under car wash?
That's not a typo. That's what the ordinance reads today.
Because my car would have to be really, really dirty for me to be in a line with 20 other people waiting to get my car washed. It just...
Well, but if you go to the car wash that's off of 77, I'll bet you they can handle at least 25 cars in that entrance.
But this is saying per bay, right?
Yeah, they wouldn't have that many per bay.
I guess what's a bay? Yeah, that's an interesting point.
Is the term bay defined?
I will check our definitions. I doubt it.
Thank you.
Other comments on this issue? Not that kind of
It's
bay.
not defined.
It's not defined?
It's not.
I probably should then, I suppose.
Yeah. Let me ask you this: is this something that the commission would like to take further, and perhaps what would the commission like to do with this report that we've received? Commissioner Carpenter.
Well, just as a, I guess, preface to that, a question, was Julie Ritzer going to be here to actually present on this? Because it would have been interesting to hear what her comments or explanations might be to some of these items.
She was not.
Okay.
I met with her a number of months ago. I think the thinking was, let's move forward with the repealing of the PCD1 ordinance, and then we would work on the rest of it and the regulations within other districts at another time.
And what was the background for the repeal in PCD1? I can't remember. Does that go back to the,
The use was it never went in. There was a proposal for a restaurant at Valley View and Wooddale,
right,
and they wanted the drive-through window, so the council adopted an ordinance that would allow it under specific conditions.
okay.
That was actually recommended, it was not recommended by the Planning Commission.
Was that unique to that particular location then? Or was it generically applicable?
It was generically applicable, but, there are very few PCD districts, and there are specific conditions that would need to apply if they were to apply to other districts. But it does allow it within the PCD1 district citywide.
And we're talking about possibly repealing it. What's the staff position on whether it should or shouldn't be repealed?
Well, since that's the only request that we've ever had in that zoning district, and that was the Planning Commission's recommendation 3 years ago, we would support that as well.
I guess the issue is this of enough concern of the Planning Commission that we want to go through the process of taking up an amended ordinance, taking into account some of the comments that we've had this evening for forwarding on to the City Council. Commissioner Forrest?
She also has a number of other, in the memo that's enclosed in our packet, she also mentions a number of other conditions that are suggested that are added to all drive-through facilities, non-idling signs, setback requirements, traffic impact study with quite a few things, including the need for future plans to mitigate traffic increases on prom night or prom day, and safety threats through design, so that it's, I don't know, there are more things there that possibly would be worthy of discussion in the future. I'm not sure.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Fisher?
Now, maybe I'm just reading this wrong, but the memo from that Julie presented, the stuff Julie presented to us last year is what's in the back of our packet, correct? But is not on the table. It's not particularly part of what we might be asked to do initially. So I think it's saying that was proposed, didn't, had some bumps in that road. So now we're looking at just going back and simply going back to what we had before, which is taking out the ability to have drive-throughs in the PCD1. But not to say we couldn't entertain anything as part of that second piece. For me, I'd be inclined just to move on to other stuff, but that's just me. To me, this drive-through thing right now is it's not at the top of my list of concerns.
Okay.
Frankly, I kind of like the idea of having a conditional use where we can actually, I think we do our best work when we look at a specific situation and try and get the best resolution to that situation. Every time we create a zoning ordinance that covers everything, it never covers everything, and there's always going to be a problem. And that's why it's in, it's out, it's up. I just as soon have it where it needs to go through a discussion. And part of it is, when you go back to why the ordinance was written the way it was anyway, I'm pretty sure it's just because you didn't want fast food in certain locations. And so then it gets a little convoluted because you start putting in a little language about, what you can serve, what you can't serve. And so there's all of that factors into this as well.
Commissioner Forrest?
Well, some of these things in Julie's memo, which, yes, it was just dated in December, they might be things that could be included. Sometimes there's language in some of our ordinances, I think, that mention items to be considered as we look at a conditional use permit. So maybe that's something that, that in evaluating it, that we consider the proximity to single-family homes or residential areas and the any effect on traffic, but yet not be prescriptive in how we go forward with that. I like the conditional use permit idea as well.
Any other comments? Commissioner Carpenter?
I guess what I would suggest, number one, I'll go back to saying what I said before. I do like the conditional use permit issue. But I would suggest that maybe we consider pulling it out of PCD1 now so that we don't have the problem of the Wooddale scenario or something else. And we can deal with this in a circumstance where if it's going to happen, it actually will take place in an area or in an area that we're probably more comfortable with. Otherwise, we're going to have it potentially out there in a PCD1 at some point as a sleeper.
Commissioner Schroeder?
Mr. Chair, if we pull it out of PCD1 district, the question I have, could someone still pursue this through a PUD? Do our PCD1 parcels actually meet the threshold for size that would allow it to move forward under? Because there might be some places where it would be possible, practical, and maybe even desirable to have a drive-through facility in a PCD1 district. But there would be another avenue for someone to pursue it. And in that case, like the conditional use, we would have a much more control over the result.
I think that could be a use through the PUD that you could write right in. If it's done well and agreeable, the city would have complete discretion over it. It's not allowed under the underlying zoning, so you would have complete discretion on that.
Mr. Platter?
So you're saying take it out of here and just have it as a PUD or a conditional use option?
So someone could pursue it through a PUD.
Right.
I think it would be difficult
So it
in a
wouldn't be
PCD1
coded.
district, but it would still be possible. We're not taking away a right that they might have today. We're giving them a vehicle to get there,
Yep.
just a different way.
Other comments?
Just generally, I'll say that, I think that works also. I'm fine with that, too.
Does anyone feel the need to move on this issue with any great dispatch? Doesn't appear to be.
Not great dispatch, but I quite frankly had totally lost track of the fact that we had this sitting out there in PDC1. And if this is something that we think could come up under a circumstance where we would perhaps not want that to happen, it would be good to address it before we can't do that.
Okay. Perhaps, Commissioner Scher.
And I would just say it seems we're fairly of like mind about what the solutions are. It would seem that maybe we could proceed and wrap it up.
Okay.
Would be my recommendation.
Would staff be prepared to take the comments that we've issued here tonight and refashion this to something for our consideration?
I could. Would you like me to add the conditional use thought to it too, and we can take a look at some conditions we might put on it to
Right.
bring something like that back? Okay.
Okay. Energy generation systems.
This is another one that was originally proposed by the Energy and Environment Commission. You may recall they had a several-page document. Members of the Planning Commission and members of the Energy and Environment Commission had gotten together a few months ago, and we talked about condensing it down into a smaller document that fit into the existing code. So that's what's before you this evening. Basically, what the attached ordinance accomplishes is that the energy collection systems are defined to include renewable, wind, and solar energy systems. These energy collection systems would be a permitted accessory use in all zoning districts. These systems are required to meet all required setbacks of the underlying zoning district, and they would not be allowed in a front yard. The height requirements of the underlying district would be applied. In the R1 and R2 districts, the maximum height would be 18 feet. That's the same as the existing requirement today. These systems could be mounted to a building, but can't extend any higher than 12 feet above the highest point of the structure. And these systems would be regulated per the noise ordinance, and a building permit would be required for installation. So with that, I would open it up for any discussion.
Comments on this suggested ordinance? Commissioner Platter? No. Commissioner Platter first.
I was just going to say, this is brought forth by the Energy Environmental Commission. Really, the purpose of it was to kind of get ahead of any of these systems coming in, and definitely not discouraging them, but having an understanding of what they would be and how they could be applied to our buildings and our building types around. So it's really kind of a cleanup from that respect to an anticipation of these happening when they come in.
Commissioner Scherer?
Carrie, I wondered how we arrived at the building-mounted energy collection system, which would be outside of an R1 or R2, not extending higher than 12 feet above the highest point of the building or structure.
Yeah, that's consistent with our antenna ordinances.
It's just that the density of an energy collection system is a lot more than an antenna, and 12 feet is a lot.
Yeah, I might ask Michael for some help, but do you recall any discussions on that?
I just recall it was something based upon the antenna height or some other height, accessory use height. That's what I recall. I don't remember any discussion on density or size so much.
To be honest, I don't know enough about these systems, just what I think I observe as I drive around town, but they can be quite large.
Depending on the system.
Right.
You know, a lot of, especially solar systems right now, are typically flat in most cases.
Okay.
To me, something like this would probably be a turbine type, potentially.
I mean,
That would be up
just
higher.
12 feet could be a lot, depending on the building and where it's placed, on which it would be, on which they would put this. Does anybody else have any response to that? Did that hit you in any way?
The thought that the question that raises in my mind, if it was a turbine, I mean, you've got to have, you can't have the blade come down and hit people in the head, so it's got to be high enough so that people are not going to get struck by it. And the question is
Probably not
does
high enough anyway.
does 12 feet, is 12 feet high enough? And does 12 feet include the radius of the turbine? Or is 12 feet to the center of the turbine? So, Commissioner Forrest?
Well, the language as it is pretty much precludes wind generators of any use, because even though this isn't an ideal part of the country for them in this urban area, to be effective, they have to be at least 30 feet above the tree line or house lines anyway, again, depending upon how distant you are from it. But it wouldn't be an efficient use of it. And also, as far as roof-mounted things, you'd need quite a support structure. So on a flat-topped commercial building, it would be a possibility to mount something, but not necessarily. A residential with a pitched roof would take a lot of structural support to do it. What was the other thing? Oh, I'm wondering, too, if we want to consider any, well, first of all, there's no exceptions in here possibly for use by an educational facility or anything like that. That might be something that would be explored in the future, say if the high school wanted to put a small wind generator on that property for educational reasons. And I'm trying to look at all my scribbles here. There was something I had a question about with the height on the houses being 18 feet. If somebody did want to put it onto a residential building of any type, then that 18 feet then includes the height of the structure itself. So if you have a house that's taller than, I mean, if you have a 1.5-story house or you have a 1-story house, I think wind wouldn't be, it wouldn't be a rooftop mounting situation. So, I mean, effectively, I mean, for anything that's going to generate energy, it's probably not going to work for wind energy with these restrictions.
I can speak to the 18 feet. That's our current ordinance today. And as an example, the Interlaken, when the Women's U.S. Open was here, they considered putting up some windmills, basically, strategically placed all around the golf course. And we told them this limitation of 18 feet, and it worked perfect for the little systems that they were going to put up. So they were quite pleased that it was an allowed use in the city. We had a standard to do it, and they met our standards. They, in the end, decided that it wasn't going to be cost-effective, and they didn't go forward with them, but the ordinance did work.
Another thing that's a possibility is I guess there's situations where they've actually mounted the smaller turbines on lamp posts in like a Walmart parking lot at the top of those, rather than as towers that were built specifically for that purpose. I don't know, I like the idea of it being somewhat compatible with the our other antenna and disc ordinances. So, and I don't know if it would make have that much impact on it, but I don't think it's, realistically anticipates putting in, what is considered a small generator even in the city.
Mr. Platter?
I was going to say, is that the conditional use type of thing on that? Or is that?
I think we need to explore it a little bit more.
Okay.
I mean, basically, I like the idea of it being an option, say, for schools to use for educational purposes. And a lot of these, the numbers out there are based on whether or not it's a realistic financially situation to do it, that you'd actually get much generation. It's not just related to, will it go around or whatever. So I think in schools it could still be a useful application. And I think it would be nice, maybe a conditional use permit thing, like you were saying, maybe for light post installations or something that's really creative like that, to have an option out there, or some way to go about it.
The option.
Kind of the same thing as drive-throughs we just talked about. A lot of these are going to have their own unique circumstances in a lot of ways. So,
and the option.
One size is not probably going to fit all here either.
Right, I would agree. The option that they would have would be the variance. If the school or someone else wanted to put something that didn't fit in, they would come before the Planning Commission for a variance to go taller than what our code is suggesting or requires.
So, Carrie, when you talk about the sound restrictions under the current noise ordinance, basically covering noise issues, I know that at least with respect to the mega windmills that are out there in farmland, et cetera, that they generate a great deal of noise, although a great deal is in the I guess the ear of the beholder, but I don't know enough about the residential or commercial applications that might be put in a city setting like Edina. But do we have concerns about whether or not our noise ordinance would be sufficient to address whatever the noise issues are with respect to a windmill?
That I don't know enough about these systems to know whether that's going to be a problem. But that language was talked about a little bit the last time that we discussed this, and we thought we should put in the state requirement.
Yeah, when we discussed that, we thought, what's in place right now, we believe to be valid, so we wanted to at least meet that and not give any leeway beyond that. I mean, that could be a variance if something else comes up, but really to address that, because it could potentially be a large concern if something came in and produced noise 24/7 or something.
And that's part of the reason I was wondering what the ordinance actually says to that, because if you have somebody, for example, I'm just thinking of a residential application where somebody's bedroom on an adjoining house is 15, 20 feet away from a little windmill that's just spinning and buzzing the whole time. I don't know what that triggers in terms of noise and whether that's a concern or not.
Yeah, we would have to go out and measure it and make sure that it meets whatever the state requirement is.
What is permitted under the ordinances that we have now?
The windmill? Or-
Yeah.
Well, you can have them in an R1 district up to 18 feet in height. They would be allowed in a commercial district as well. We do allow them.
Are there any in Edina right now?
I don't believe there are.
There's solar. No, no windmills.
Right. City Hall has solar.
Solar.
I'm guessing that doesn't make much noise.
Can you hear it?
Commissioner Staunton?
So just so I understand, Carrie, so the maximum height in a residential district in the R1 and R2 is 18 feet. Can you have a building-mounted system in a residential district?
I believe you could. It just couldn't extend 12 feet above the highest point of the structure.
So you'd have to have a 6-foot-high structure.
Well, then it wouldn't be
building-mounted.
The maximum height would be a freestanding, that 18 feet. So if you had a freestanding structure, 18 is the maximum. If it were attached to a house that could be 25 feet tall, it just couldn't extend 12 feet above the...
So if you have a house that has a 35-foot top, it could go another 12 feet over the top of that in a residential. So you could have 47, 48 feet, maybe higher with some of the steep peaks.
We can right now with an antenna.
Okay. And is the antenna our ordinance, or is that federal?
That's our ordinance.
Okay. The other thing is, so all of this stuff in subdivision 19 that talks about the setbacks, the heights, the building mounting, noise, and building permit, is that for the things that are defined up there in section 1?
That would be, right.
So I would say that we ought to call them the same thing.
Yeah, energy generation systems.
Because they're energy collection systems in one place and energy generation systems in the other. Now, I don't know if there's energy generation systems elsewhere in the code, but...
Yeah, that's the new term that was suggested by the Energy and Environment Commission. And the energy collection systems, that's the current ordinance. So that's a good catch. We want to be consistent there.
Okay.
Commissioner Scherer?
With the addition of my colleagues' comments, I don't find this clear. It is not immediately clear to me that you could attach in an R1 or R2 district a device to the top of an already very tall building and add 12 feet. I actually was separating them in my mind the way I read it, that the R1 and R2 max was 18 feet, period, without respect to whatever type of system, and that the energy collection system discussion was more for commercial or other types of buildings. So I think we need to tighten the language or do something different here to make that more clear.
Certainly, we could exclude rooftop, although maybe you still want to allow solar.
I
attached.
don't want to exclude
The
rooftop.
18 feet refers to freestanding systems,
It does.
as opposed, and then the building mounted obviously refers to building mounted, so you could make that clarification, I would think.
Define these
Yeah.
types of systems
Yeah.
and be specific in our requirements for each one.
One thing you could do is take wind energy systems out of this proposal altogether and handle that under a separate ordinance, because obviously there's a lot of consideration that goes into whether or not you have a wind energy system. Just a thought. Commissioner Staunton?
On that point, and maybe Commissioner Platter can give us some guidance. In this definition, we talk about energy generation systems, and we include renewable, which just says solar and wind. Well, I guess it says such as. And then it identifies wind and solar. Are there others that we should be thinking about in terms, I suppose the others tend to be ground-based, and so height is not the issue?
Ground source heat pump, really, that's in the ground, so no one ever sees it, so we didn't even really bring it up.
Okay.
This is all that we believe right now would be noticeable,
Height-related?
height-related, or some type of setback, or something like that.
Because certainly geothermal isn't going to,
Yeah.
that's not going to be a height issue.
My neighbors got it 2 doors down, and they came in one day and put the wells in, and you have no
But-
idea it's there.
Maybe a setback issue, though.
Right, or if you had some kind of, what's the phrase, the composting, the biogeneration, biodigester, you might want setback issues with respect to that, I don't know.
Yeah, we didn't,
Or just beneficial, right?
Yeah.
not that you can't, but we didn't consider that one just because they're not, you'd have a compost in your backyard, but that's not a system. Right, it's not
And so
collecting energy.
that hasn't been something that people are,
We haven't seen a lot of that.
okay.
mean,
I know at
could
one
be,
point
but-
in Linden Hills, there was a discussion about a
That was,
digester of some type.
yeah, that was more of a community-wide one, so it would have
Right.
been, not industrial size, but it would have been substantially beyond what would be in a residence.
But if say a collection of commercial entities in a commercial district wanted to do something.
We're working our way there.
All right, well, I just raised the issue.
Commissioner Forrest?
I have a question about the front yard language that, it says that, where is it now? Oh, under setbacks, and shall not be located within the front yard. First of all, I don't know if that's necessarily necessary in a commercial district, say in a district that has a lot of warehouses and commercial buildings. They may not have what you would call a front yard. It also, a corner lot that has 2 front yard setbacks would be affected differently, and maybe that's just the way it would be, but it's something to keep in mind. And also, it seems like a lot of that then has to do with the appearance of, say, a collection of solar arrays or something like that sitting out there in the front yard. But yet, would we allow them on a house, as facing the streetscape? If the visual effect is what we're trying to go for here, something in the front yard might be more easily screened than something on a rooftop. But then, when you talk about that, maybe we should consider whether it's building integrated type solar or versus a separate mechanical solar array that's attached to a rooftop. There's a lot of different factors that, with the changing technology that's out there currently, that, and also, the way it's worded, it's pretty broad. Basically, the definition could apply to individual solar landscape lights that just stick along a path in your yard. So I don't, it is pretty broad. I like simple, but.
Never thought of that one.
They can't be more than 18 feet high, though.
So we're covered.
Well, a couple other issues. How many, can can one homeowner put 2 turbines on top of their house?
Yeah, there's not a regulation
You
on
know,
the number, no?
do you have to put the solar heating, the solar energy systems, do they have to be on the back of the house, or can they be on the front part of the roof of the house? Or, you know, you start thinking about this, and there's a, you know, I don't know.
It does seem that it would be necessary to apply some sort of restriction to control the number or amount of square feet or whatever that you might be assuming with this. Otherwise, you could have, I suppose, 4 or 5 units sitting on top of somebody's roof. That may be an exaggeration of what people would do.
And they want to face south, so however you're, just happen to face south, that's your front, right? So.
I think it's fine so long as it's not in my neighborhood.
So we're good then.
We'll write that in there.
Yeah, write that in there.
So I think what people are saying that it's more, needs more definition exactly what front is, or screening, or something, some more definition of how it would be applied potentially. That's what I think I'm hearing.
And that front yard language is the existing language. That's the requirement in today's ordinance. You can't have it in a front yard. Correct.
And what would we envision in terms of screening of a solar unit?
Well, just screening from, well, I guess I'm thinking more commercial, so.
I'm just curious.
I was thinking more commercial, where you have it on the roof of a building where you screen it so you don't see it from the side, but it's still all exposed on the top. Maybe that's where I was thinking parapet would be on the screen.
Well, if it's in your yard, it could be, you know, in your front yard, and if it could be oriented so it still catches the rays, you may have shrubbery that would be at the front of your yard that would screen it from, you know, visual impact on the street. And yet I'm all in favor of coming up with some language that shows that we're really in favor of promoting renewable energy sources. And I also don't want to, as we get hung up on the vision thing, preclude using some of, you know, the ever-changing and improving, solar roofing materials, like solar shingles and other things. And it's a pretty rapidly changing field, I think. So I don't want to be too restrictive either.
Yeah, especially, I'm saying the front yard, how is the front yard defined? How would that be defined? And is that things facing the front yard, or is it, how is that defined? And again, to the point, we want to encourage it, but we want to make it reasonable too, that someone doesn't come in with something that we have to, get pushed back on.
Is this something that would be appropriate to ask the Energy Environment Commission to take another look at and bring something back, just take into account some of the concerns and issues that we've discussed here?
I think that'd be relevant.
Commissioner Schroeder?
I just have one more question. In the definitions, both the wind energy and solar energy systems describe it as intended primarily for on-site consumption. Besides primarily, what else would it be used for? I mean, are we going to try and sell it to the neighbors or redistribute it back to the grid?
There are systems like that. Yeah.
And solar, you can. I mean, solar, you.
So, but what are there other implications to that? Do we have to have a way to redistribute that off of the site back to the grid that has a visual impact on neighbors? What's the method for getting it off of the site?
Extension cords. I don't know the answer to that question.
Some systems, if they produce excess power than the thing uses, it is tied into the grid. So in other words, it does sell back to the electric company. What this would preclude is something, say somebody built something in their neighborhood, then wanted to sell it to 10 other people in their neighborhood. That's what it's trying to catch and not do.
There are block-type
There's black.
arrangements
Correct.
with things, because
Yes.
somebody may not be able to put one in their front yard, so there's kind of like block arrangements where things are centered away from the streetscape, and then they can share among them and things like
So the
that, or use it for
neighborhood.
emergency generation, so.
Interesting.
Yeah, but I think the point is not to allow people to put up wind turbines and solar arrays simply for the purpose of selling the electricity to the utility.
Right, it's incidental.
It's that there will no doubt. I suspect that probably, if the thing is generating excess energy, it goes back to the grid anyhow somehow. I'm not an electrical engineer, but it's got to go someplace. And so the electricity that goes back to the grid is incidental to the fact that they've built this to provide energy efficiency for their home or for
Correct.
that building.
Yes.
So I think that's the intent. Commissioner Carpenter?
I'm wondering if there must be other ordinances in the metro area that deal with this already. The city of Minneapolis, I'm thinking, must have something.
I know they looked around, and one that's in the back here was actually from, I think it was Naperville, Illinois, that they looked at.
Yeah, but I was
That's
thinking
what's
something more
behind
local.
there. And when we were looking at that, we can do some more research, but we're looking at that, it seemed to have a lot of things that were already dealt with in the code. So we tried to pull back the things that weren't already addressed, and pull those, or make it more simple and take advantage of what was already in the code versus going back through all the different areas and working through those two.
Okay.
I think the discussion suggests that the commission is in favor of doing some more work on this thing. We've got a lot of questions, and perhaps the Energy and Environment Commission can provide some more guidance on the issue. Does that sound reasonable? Okay. Thank you for that. Subdivisions.
Okay, this one we talked about back in January, and given the subdivision requests that we had before that, we kind of tabled this. The discussion that the Planning Commission had, you were in general leaning toward looking at a minimum lot size requirement that was more uniform citywide. That would be to create a median. The median would establish minimum lot size for lots under 9,000 square feet and 75 feet in width, so it's uniform across the entire R1 zoning district. And then we also talked about opening up the PUD into the R1 district, where we can maybe get more creative development. So the ordinance that I've drafted before you accomplishes both of those things. And the other thing that the commission asked for was an indication of roughly how many lots out there do we have that are 100-foot wide lot in a 50-foot wide lot area that was platted originally as 50-foot wide lots. And so I've attached some graphics that indicate that. Just generally, there's about 25 100-foot wide lots up in the Morningside area, and I've provided the map that shows those specifically. There's about 20 more in the middle section of Edina as it sweeps across east to west, kind of that Pamela Park, South Harriet Park area. And then we have about 20 up in the northwest corner of the city, kind of that Hopkins School District area. So as you see, there are quite a few lots that remain over generally about 100 feet wide that potentially could be considered for subdivision, similar to what we saw on Brookview. If we went the median route that we had discussed the last time, the property on Brookview, they still would have needed variances. They would have needed lot area variances for both lots. They would have been very minor. It was about 30 square feet under what the median was for that area. And then there was a lot depth variance. It was like 0.2 inches on the depth. So they would have been extremely minor variances, but they still would have required variances nonetheless. So with that, we can open it up for discussion. And I think as we talked about, too, as we're developing this, the idea was we would continue to have the discussion, and this would be a topic for when we have a work session with the City Council.
Thoughts and comments about this issue? If I might, I don't mean to dominate the discussion, and you know that I have some rather strong feelings about this issue. But I would suggest 2 Sundays ago in the Star Tribune was an editorial concerning infill development in, I think, Portland, Denver, and Minneapolis. And both Portland and Denver adopted a concept that they wanted to encourage density and infill development inside the city for the purpose of increasing the value of the properties inside the city. So if you wanted to come in and split lots, you could do that, build homes people could afford, get people into the city. Minneapolis and the Twin Cities area has taken another different tack on that, and they've not encouraged infill development or density. At least they're behind the power curve on that, which has led to a diminution of the populations of both Minneapolis and St. Paul as compared to an increase in the population within the city of Denver and the city of Portland. And the idea being, if you don't encourage this infill and density, you tend to get people leave for other areas in the area. You get some blighted neighborhoods and so on and so forth, and you want to encourage this density. Does not seem to be a favorable position here in the city, given what the experience we've had on this commission with granting variances for lot subdivisions, and given the experience we've had on the city council. And I think it's something that ought to be considered. It's anomalous to me that a person in the Brookview neighborhood could buy 3 lots, could buy 3 houses or 4 houses, and by sending a letter to the county auditor, combine those lots into one and build a 10,000 square foot house and have absolutely no input from the Planning Commission or consideration of the neighborhood. And yet, if somebody, as Mr. Shanewetter, for example, wanted to take a lot that had been so created and reconfigure it to its original dimension and original configuration, has to come through 2 public hearings in order to get variances in order to do what he wanted to do. And it just doesn't seem to make logical sense to me. And from a logic standpoint alone, I think I would like to see something done about that. The variance process does not seem to me to work in those kinds of situations. I mean, you recall the conversation we had with Brookview. I mean, we got to the point practically where the mere fact that you ask for a variance is a self-created problem, which would defeat the variance. I mean, that's how you can get so wrapped around the axle on this thing. And so, I really think we need to take a look at this issue and encourage infill development. Otherwise, you're going to have a situation like the house, the other block from Brookview, where you've got a house that happens to be on a 100-foot lot and was not allowed to be subdivided. I don't know what's happening to that house. I mean, you just get, you get crummy house. You get a crummy situation where properties deteriorate, and frankly, what happens to that lot ultimately affects our property values in other sections of the city as well. It's not just isolated to that particular neighborhood. So, having taken care of this issue, I guess we can move forward. Other comments? Commissioner Platter.
Well, I just have a comment, kind of the reverse of that. And so right now I hear a lot of comments on, well, you know, subdivide it and build a monster home. Well, people right now, they wouldn't build any bigger homes than already lots that are 50 feet already. So they're building the same size homes on 50-foot lots today as you could if the subdividing. So I guess I'm asking what the difference, so if you take, right now, if you have a 50-foot lot, you can build the house out to 5 feet from both sides. Just what people would do if they'd subdivide it. So when people come in and say, well, you're going to just split it up and build a big house there, you can do that today on any 50-foot lot. I see it happening all over our neighborhoods, right next to me, right over the way. So I'm not sure why we should keep a landowner who happens to split it not have the same privilege as that person that already owns a 50-foot lot and is allowed to maximize their value on that lot by selling it, having it tear down already on that lot. Does that make any sense? So it seems like you're not allowing the person with the 100-foot lot to do the same thing that 50-foot lot can already do.
I think that's somewhat true. Go back to the Brookview, not the Brookview, but the situation with GMS at the last hearing we had. The reason why that was a problem was that he had acquired the property and was subdividing the property, and by virtue of taking those steps, then needed a variance. And that was what triggered the necessity for it there, and that's what also triggered the idea of a self-created problem. And I think that was the reason why there was opposition. There may have been other reasons, but the technical reason why it was turned down was because in that particular context, it was self-created because of the steps that he had taken that he controlled.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that one at all. It's the other ones that could happen.
And I just continue with one other thing. I know that at one or two of the prior hearings that we had on similar subjects like this, I made the point, and others probably did as well, that there are a ton of 50-foot lots out there. And exactly the same thing can easily happen and will obviously happen on a property-by-property basis as people sell their homes. There's no way to prevent development on the 50-foot lots along the lines of what you're describing, other than through the, there's no way to prevent the unavoidable reality, which is that as properties are sold, those things are going to become available, and those types of houses will be built.
Yeah, all I'm getting at is why there and not here. That's my question.
Why there and not? Be more specific about that, why there and not here.
Well, if you can do it on a 50-foot lot, why can't you subdivide a 100-foot lot and do the same thing?
My answer would be, because our code currently says our minimum lot size is 75 feet, and it's been that way for decades. The fact that it was originally, with respect, I disagree with the chairman. The fact that something was platted one way, never developed in that way, and 60 years have passed and we have a certain code in place speaks very strongly to me.
But also, times are changing. We have a lot, people don't want to live 40 miles away anymore. They want an opportunity to live closer. And
if that's the case, we need to look at our code and decide if we want to change our minimum lot size. But we haven't done that. And we have, at least currently, a significant number of our population that regularly come before us when these things come up that don't seem to want to go that direction, don't seem to want to create a lot of additional 50-foot lots for the kind of building that trends are saying are occurring in some cities. But in our city, we seem to have a lot of people that don't want that. And we haven't had public hearings, and we haven't discussed cutting that lot size. I think that would be the only route we could go if we wanted to look at that as a future development proposition.
And I think it's better that we're clear on that one way or another and not dance around it by giving variances and subdivisions and kind of through that process instead. I think a lot of the stuff that's been written about infill development, and there are experts here, and I'm not one, but the stuff that I've run across, a lot of that is referring to, in those cities, is referring to areas that are already somewhat more densely populated or on the edge of places like that. And so it's kind of hard to compare apples to apples sometimes, but my concern, and I'm for that. I am for appropriate increases in density. You know, I don't think it's an evil thing in and of itself. But what's happened in our city versus even, say, in Richfield or something is we aren't having homeowners trying to improve their homes. We're having speculators come in and tear down houses, some of which, like one historic bungalow in the Morningside area, had been completely redone, all the woodwork refinished, new heating plant, electrical updated, everything. And somebody came in because it was a decent price and tore it down and put up a very large house again, a new large house. So it's the purpose
They didn't
is
subdivide. That's something they
no,
could do
they
in
didn't.
place.
No, they didn't. But that's what's. I'm just talking about the tear downs in general, I guess, more so than just subdivisions. Lot size and the trends that are going on. And a lot of the complaints have been about the fact that we have these tear downs and then these overly massive houses compared to the other houses in the neighborhood are going up. And is it our goal really to maximize somebody's economic gain on their property? Is that our city's mission? Every time, when this happens, it does change the character of the neighborhood as it goes on. It changes the reason some people moved into that neighborhood. In some areas, actually, in single-family residential areas, it's been documented that housing prices have gone down, that there becomes a big turnover in that case. And I guess my concern, too, is then we're losing, I'm not going to say affordable housing, we're losing variation in our variability in our housing stock. We're losing these kinds of neighborhoods. Well, basically, is this what we are? Is a city? I mean, I can't dictate that or define that.
But the actions we take discourage the thing that you're trying to encourage. We don't want people coming in and tearing down houses and building massive houses in a neighborhood of smaller houses. And yet, when somebody comes along with a proposal to take a 100-foot lot, divide it into two 50-foot lots, and build smaller houses that are consistent with the neighborhood, all hell breaks loose at these meetings because you can't change my neighborhood because 20 years ago, some realtor who had no authority to speak for the city told someone that this thing would never change as long as they lived there. I mean, the logic is just backwards.
It is still the code, John.
And the setbacks are shorter,
Then my recommendation would be to change the code that says the minimum lot size in the city of Edina is 50 feet.
And we could have those discussions, but we haven't to date.
That's what we're doing today.
Yeah.
That's what this is.
Yeah. And I think the impact, too, is
It's a couple strong
of the
opinions here.
setbacks
Huh?
can be different, too. I mean, because you can build a house on a smaller lot, closer to the lot line, which means effectively close to the neighbor's backyard or looking in their bedroom window or whatever. It's not an easy question. There's arguments on both sides of it, and I will recognize that. I just think that we've heard a lot about the complaints about tear-downs and then overly large houses going in. In my situation, I don't care so much about the lot size. I just think we should maybe reevaluate how big of a house can be built on a smaller lot, a lot that's 50 feet or smaller. Perhaps we look at implementing some things that make those smaller lots make the properties relate better to the other properties in the neighborhood.
Presently, people don't seem to want that either. I'm not trying to carry Shane Witter's brief for him, but he had a pretty nice proposal for a house on that second lot last time, which was small.
Well, he wanted it, but the neighbors didn't. So,
Yeah.
and you say people don't want it. I mean,
That's right.
it's
Well,
both ways.
in my neighborhood, I've never seen a variance come through for any of the houses that have been redone.
You don't need them.
I know, but my point is, there's never any variances, but they're maxed out on those lots. So if that's a concern, then that needs to go back to that, and they're all built within those variances right now. My point is they can max those out already at 50-foot lots, and
Right.
so for someone to subdivide you're doing the exact same thing, is, in my opinion.
Well, I'm talking about adjusting when we have a tear down in the, you know, in the city. When there's a tear down and the lot is a small lot and it's in a neighborhood, maybe we should be evaluating what else is in that neighborhood because of the proximity to the other homes and the effect it may have. It's not so much the size of the lot. Right now, unless it needs a variance, or it's, you know, in a historic district or something, it doesn't need.
Yeah, the vast majority, just.
If it does need a variance, it does need a variance.
It doesn't.
You know,
It doesn't. It doesn't.
It's a step to say we're going to start imposing architectural.
No, I'm just talking about. I think it would be nice in some of these neighborhoods, you know, like the street on Oak Lawn that didn't have a single two-story house on it, that block. That when you, perhaps on small lots, maybe set a say 50 feet or less or whatever, that then it triggers something that makes the house relate, just like we talked about lot size relating to medians, perhaps it relates to the height and massing of the other buildings in some manner.
How about as part of the requirements to subdivide, that you would have?
I'm not talking about subdividing at all.
If you would
yeah.
subdivide, that your requirements are different on that lot than if they were separate. So if you subdivide, so you have certain requirements on a 50-foot lot. If you had a 100-foot that you would subdivide, each of those 50-foot lots would have a different requirement to fit something in the neighborhood, or different than what's allowed right now.
Yeah, yeah. And
Is that
any
kind
other
of what
house
you're
that
saying?
didn't subdivide too. That, you know, if just basically it would be, instead of looking at lot size, maybe we look at what's built on lots, because that seems to be what the complaint is that people have, that you know, the houses that are going in next door are really large. The scale is different on the streetscape. They're looking in my bedroom window from their dining room. You know, that's what people are complaining about. Or their backyard, they have no privacy anymore because the length of the new house is, you know, in order to maximize the lot size. I'm not against the big houses. I'm not against the small lots. I'm more concerned about, you know, what people seem to be complaining about is incompatibility more than anything else. And I personally don't think it's our mission to maximize economic return, but I don't think it's our job either to micromanage appearances and, you know, but size and massing seem to be issues that are, you know, it's been, people all over the country are facing that one and trying to figure out how to deal with it.
A lot of these are also custom-built homes, so they are getting with the developer. They want that house. They want 4,000 square feet.
There's a lot that have stayed vacant in our town, too,
Yeah,
that have
a
been
lot,
built by
at least around me,
builders.
they've all been, many have been pre-sold, and that person buying that obviously has wanted 4,000 or 5,000 square feet on that house. So it's the home buyers that are driving it, not necessarily developers.
I agree.
And it's hard to
That's the
tell
home
somebody
buyers
that
who are
they
coming in
can't.
to buy, though. It's not somebody who's already living in the neighborhood, too. So, you know, I mean, like I said, there's arguments on both sides. I'm not.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Staunton?
So this is a great discussion. So it seems to me...
Happens every time these come up.
Seems to me there's a couple of issues. One is this whole business about how big the lots should be, and then there's the, for lack of a better phrase, the McMansion issue. And we did, some of the people who've been on the commission longer than me probably remember, we did try to tackle the McMansion issue, and frankly, we went around and around and around, and then we ended up with like a 1 foot above grade change to the code. That was about all we did after all that. So, I mean, we can go back into that, but I'm not optimistic that we're going to make much headway. Now, maybe we will if the development climate turns and then there's more activity and people are upset, and then it'll come back up again. But the other issue is just this, you know, this lot size issue, and there's these kind of lots that are different than the ones that are around them and that are bigger in this question. And I think I think I get what Commissioner Scherer is saying about expectations, and I think it's important that we figure out how to address that. But I also think some of these lots, it's just kind of silly that, you know, you get a 100-foot lot in a 50-foot neighborhood, or a 150-foot lot in a 75-foot neighborhood. I guess that one isn't a problem. But certainly a 75-foot limit in Morningside or in the far northwest corner of the city or in Pamela Park is not in character with those neighborhoods. And absent some kind of representation, like some folks who've come in front of us have said they've gotten, I think a lot of the folks who move into those neighborhoods would be surprised that there's not an ability to make 2 lots out of a 100-foot lot. So then, and we're going to have, it sounds like, disagreement about whether we can change that or not. And I think, Commissioner Scherer, you're right that, you know, this is the beginning of a process where we're going to have to get some public input and see what people think about it. But even if we are going to do it, you know, the question becomes, what's the best way? And Carrie, it seems like what you're proposing here is a kind of a median within a 500-foot radius. And I wonder about, you know, one of the things we wrestled with when we tried to do the McMansion stuff was this notion of kind of an average FAR in the neighborhood. And one of the reasons we didn't do it was so labor intensive. It was really hard to administer. How are we going to figure out how many square feet each of the houses around it? Are we comfortable that this is, you know, 500 feet? Why 500 feet? Why not 300 feet? Why not 200 feet? Why not the block? Why not the neighborhood? So I think one of the things, I don't have an answer to that, but I think one of the things we have to figure out is you know, how do we calibrate that? I think my own feeling is it's probably better not to have a set number of feet because you are trying to get the context of the area. But I'm not sure what the best way to do it is, and so I'd be interested in thoughts and discussion on that as well.
Commissioner Schroeder?
I have a thought. A thought I've had before. It's in here. I don't think we should be messing with the dimensions because what we're trying to do is control to a better degree what somebody might expect to have happen through the subdivision process. And if we would simply say we want control, if there's going to be a subdivision, we want to know what's going to happen. The neighbors want to know what's going to happen. We want to be responding to not a potential of what might go on the site, but what actually will be proposed to go on the site. And the way to go about that is to expand the PUD to allow for a PUD to happen on a single family in an R1, which is on, it's further back here. We haven't talked about it yet. But it takes the things that Commissioner Staunton is mentioning out of us. Now we're not applying the change to the entire city. We're requiring a subdivider to prove to us that they can provide something that provides greater value to the community than what exists today. It's the same standard we would apply to a commercial PUD. Prove to us that it's better. Prove to us that the city's getting something better, and make it so that the neighbors and us and the city council has a definitive expectation of what will be happening here. Prove to us through an actual design, not just an arbitrary line drawn between on a larger lot. Prove to us that it's better. Prove to us, show us what's going to happen.
Commissioner Scherer?
I'm intrigued with that. I don't know how many of you had a chance to listen to the Channel 16 last city council meeting when the Brookview discussion occurred and was rejected. But it was interesting to me that there are within our city council, there are different views on this distance questionnaire that Commissioner Staunton brings up. One member discussed caring more about the block, which was this where you are and the houses behind you in terms of relative size and what the lots were like, and viewed that as kind of the most salient thing to evaluate. Another cared about the street, which would be the houses that faced each other across the street, and what the makeup was of that particular area. And so there are so many ways that I think different people look at what is consistent with the neighborhood, what is consistent with the streetscape, that pretty hard to define on an overall citywide basis. We did go through that exercise, I think it was several chairs ago. And we didn't come to a significant conclusion in terms of a change with our code, which is what is a little appealing about this most recent proposal that you're making.
Well, and I think I'd go further. It's really hard to establish a neighborhood if the only consideration you have is how wide the lot is. We're talking about things that are experienced three-dimensionally, and it's not just that one dimension from one lot line to another. I think it's really hard to define it on a neighborhood or block or street basis. But if you start to think about the visual experience someone has as they live or move through that on that block or street, I think it becomes easier to deal with.
It's a very interesting concept. I like it.
I was just going to say, kind of the reverse of that. Is there something to be said about getting some kind of ordinance around when you combine lots? Is that, say, if you bought 250s and make it 100, do you have to do a PUD in that direction too? I'm just asking the question.
Not right now.
I'm saying, should there be?
Well, it would certainly
mean,
take care of the logic issue.
Well, then that would at least bring up if someone, the monster home type of thing, that it wasn't also just an assessor letter written right now.
If I might, I'm not crazy about the idea of the of a median lot area, because that would do nothing for example, the lot on Brookview, because you're never going to get 250-foot lots on that parcel, because you got 100-foot lots, and the median's always going to be greater than 50 feet.
Median is the middle value.
Middle value. So
The average of the two middle values.
2/3 of the lot or 50 foot, it would be.
You're going to have more smaller houses by number. If you have a mix of equal large lots and small lots, you're going to have more small lots, so that's going to skew it to the small side,
It would,
too.
but
That's
you will end up with
that's
a
what would
50-foot lot.
But I agree that I think like Commissioner Staunton was saying, we've got this there's some arbitrariness to the 500-foot thing, and then as well as the median thing. It just kind of throws it out there into no man's land. It doesn't have the specifics, and I think a lot of the fear about this whole subdividing and going back to a 50-foot or 40-foot or whatever, or having no lot standard is that fear of what's going to be built there. I mean, if somebody had proposed two modest story-and-a-half houses on Brookview, I don't think there'd be such an uproar from the neighbors. I think it might have even been welcomed, but or at least understood. But there is a fear, I think, not just with the subdividing, but with the teardowns, and, that we don't know what's going to go in there, because we've seen things that sometimes are scary, sometimes they're great, but sometimes they're scary.
Other thoughts? I like the PUD idea.
It looks like we do the whole thing with just striking one line in a whole ordinance.
That takes care of it.
Yeah. Because then, for example, you could take that lot. You say, I would like to build 2 houses on this lot. Here's exactly what I want to build on the north side, and here's exactly what I want to build on the south side. And the city could say, you've got to do that, and you've got to put a tree here.
Can't take that tree there.
You can't take that tree there. Yeah.
So are we talking about a mandatory PUD then, as to each site?
For any subdivision?
Yeah, for any
You
subdivision.
can still seek a variance if you want.
You could seek a variance.
Well, that takes it out of the R1 zone then, right?
No, it still has to align with the comprehensive plan.
It's in line with the comprehensive plan, but it's a rezoning. So, I mean, does there any effect as far as what affects it then? Basically, you just say that all R1 requirements still apply to the lot along with these or something.
It's a different vote at city council.
Yeah, you still have complete discretion, because they would need a variance under the existing zoning for that site.
Those would always need 4 out of 5,
Rezoning, it would actually, be only if you change the comprehensive plan do you need the four votes.
Would the PUD change?
It is a rezoning, but a rezoning
No, within the
can,
comprehensive plan. Okay.
right, if it's consistent with the comp plan, just 3 votes.
And you could include combining of lots in the
Yes.
same language.
Yes, or you require a process. You need a formal process with public input if you're going to combine lots. You know, because
You could cover it that way.
you need to cover that.
Really? Could planner T, does that happen very often? Do we
You
combine
don't
very
agree
often?
with that?
Solving a problem that doesn't exist.
It happens very rarely. I can't think of an instance, at least in my time here, where someone has combined lots to build a really big house. It's usually they're combining lots, they want to build a swimming pool next door, they want to expand their lot. I can't think of an instance where it's been to build a super big house.
The super big houses that have been built in my neighborhood in Indian Hills have just been built on super big platted lots.
I think that's a solution in search of a problem.
I concur.
I get the theory that we're trying to be consistent, and on that level, you know, the really big lots have an exemption from our 75-foot, and then the maximum, you know, so the symmetry would suggest that same exception be available in the smaller lots. My only word of caution on the PUD is that it has a nice silver bullet feeling, but we can't rezone every lot in the city, so we should just be mindful of that. And I know it isn't exactly out of control yet. We've just had a couple, but our experience with them, and I think we're getting better as each one comes in front of us. But I think it's what Commissioner Schroeder was saying about there has to be some articulation of what's in it for the neighborhood or the community or the city. What are we getting out of this that the ordinary code wouldn't accomplish? And I, even to the point where we may want to think about, you know, sandpapering the ordinance a little bit, just to, because we're getting that as a planning commission as we work through these. We're, I think, starting to find our voice on that as we talk to developers. But it'll be good as we capture that to memorialize that so that folks outside the city or developers or property owners who come in get a sense of what we're going to be expecting in these PUDs.
Some creative options, like I can't remember the current name, like something neighborhoods, like cluster homes, like where you, like GMS proposed, you know, anyway, with the
Sure,
groups
yeah.
of homes, and there are some areas. I don't think that particular location is ideal.
Pocket neighborhoods.
But there may be pocket neighborhoods. Thank you. But there may be places where it would be very, very appropriate, you know, to do that kind of thing. It would give us an avenue to do that.
I think we've got to get something so we get away from the variance process, because the Supreme Court acted and really tightened down the requirements for variances. The legislature came back and loosened the requirements, and my impression is that we have created an even stricter requirement for variance on this planning commission than what was ever intended by the statute. So I think, you know, we granted a variance tonight for a lot that is basically unbuildable without the variance. And if a lot is basically unbuildable without a variance, they'll get a variance. But every other case, I mean, we even had objection to it tonight, you know? It's an untenable situation.
I would take exception to the characterization, though. I don't think that has been the case with this planning commission. There is one that we voted to deny. There were others in that neighborhood in Pamela Park that we voted to approve, and one of which went on to the city council, which was then denied. But I just think I understand your strong feelings on this, Mr. Chair.
Perhaps,
But I think you're a little over your skis.
perhaps I overstated the case. So what's the next step? We take this and look at a proposal that would, maybe two proposals with a couple different solutions, a PUD kind of proposal, and then more of this, the median lot, assuming that we can understand what medians and averages are.
I'm hearing not support for the median for under 9,000 square feet, that we just move toward this PUD kind of approach, and maybe it's like Commissioner Staunton mentioned, some sandpapering of the ordinance. Maybe we need to add some additional language in the PUD section that talks about the R1 type of a PUD. Another thing to consider as we move forward with this, if we eliminate, or if we open up the PUD to all R1 districts, that includes all of our churches in town, and so that opens up another opportunity, and that's probably the right thing to do. We talked about it with the waters, as we may have gotten something better with the PUD in that situation. So that's another thing to consider as we're moving forward with this. But I think what we need to do next is probably set up a work session with the City Council, and we can
That sounds
flesh it out
appropriate.
with them.
Commissioner Fisher?
Just, and I don't know how I would feel one way or another about it, but is it okay, is it conceivable that we could have PUD in specific opportunities in an R1 district, for example, subdivision, but not allow it generally? Or once you allow it, you allow it? And maybe that's more of a city attorney question, but something we should look into. Because, I don't know, in some ways I regret that. I mean, we took what we thought was an appropriate step in keeping PUD out of R1 just so we could get this moving on and try it in our community, but you've already seen examples where it would have been really nice to have that. Yeah. And I guess that's part of the public process. We'll find out how other people feel about that. But it would be good to ask that question.
Other comments? Okay, Carrie will take that forward. Thank you all for your comments on this. It's an interesting topic, for sure. Correspondence and petitions. You received council connection. You received your attendance sheet. Carrie, I got a question on the attendance sheet. If you look, pardon me? No, it looks like Commissioner Staunton and I are tied. The caption underneath the chart, a member that does attend 4 consecutive regular meetings, I think it does not attend 4 consecutive regular meetings. So I'm in good shape then. You received the council connection. You received your attendance sheet. The chair has no comments. Commission member comments? Any commission members need to say anything else? Wish to say anything else? Okay. Staff comments? Nothing? Okay. With that, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Is there a second? Second. All in favor? Aye. We are adjourned.